Okay, welcome back to part 3 of 4 in my Iliad length rant, Sell It All or Hold the Line. In part 1, I explained why it was absolutely no accident that this product was priced at $1,000, and why it's probably the best case scenario for the secondary market, aside of course from the scenario of them not doing this at all, but we'll put that to the side. I also made the case that this product is 100% aimed at players, which clearly foretells that they will come around and do this again. Then in part 2, we went swimming into the numbers a bit. We looked at the sales of gold bordered cards and revised duels going back a couple months, and arrived at a sort of worst case prediction of a 9.2% loss of market value of these proxy reprinted cards relative to the background market. So in these last two parts, I want to cover what you should do with your reserve list cards, silver and bronze era stuff. We'll talk about that now. And then in the final part, should you buy this product, and am I buying this product? Okay, so let's get into that. Part 3. What should you do with your reserve list cards? All right, so my prediction onboards a couple of assumptions, which we discussed in the previous part, including the print run of the 30th anniversary set, the expectations there, and then the correlation of these new proxies coming out with the gold bordered cards that exist. With those assumptions, I'm predicting a worst case medium to long term impact on the revised dual end market of about a 10% drop in price relative to the background market. Or you could look at it as a 10% stagnation in the ceiling of the overall market, should it rise later. So what about for these other Silver Age cards, Bronze Age cards, all this other stuff that Wizards is going to get to, but they haven't gotten there yet? Well, let's talk about that. So, first of all, I'd like to remind everybody that most of the reserve list is garbage. Let's get that out of the way. So, there we go. For example, most Arabian Nights cards really aren't playable today, and their value is almost entirely collectible. So, they're immune from this, non-vintage product in much the same way as ABU. So we're talking about the cards that aren't garbage and that are playable. Anything that already has a gold bordered version or a foreign print version, I expect almost no change. As we looked at in the previous video, all of the gold cards for the most popular vintage staples have tons of inventory available today, right now. There is enough Gaia's Cradles to absorb all of the sales of people buying Gaia's Cradle. But people still choose the real ones at a consistent rate of 2/3 of the time. And the only reason I could see this being different is because the front is a little more appealing versus these, gold bordered cards. But I doubt that's very significant, At an average cost multiplier of more than 7x, if you're comfortable with spending that much more for a real card, I can't think that the border was the deal breaker, But of course, this will depend a bit on the price of the 30th singles. If Wizards' equity calculations hold, these will price much higher even than the gold bordered alternatives. But as long as they're not less than 7x, our extrapolation should hold. So again, if you have a card that's already got a gold version or a foreign version, this is kind of already priced in. you've already lost a third of the buyers to alternatives. And there's already enough inventory in those alternatives to supply the whole market. That's not the reason people aren't choosing them. 69% of the people, again, are buying the real card, not because there aren't enough gold bordered cards or foreign cards. All right, what about reserve list cards that don't have some kind of gold bordered or foreign treatment? In this case, I would expect the impact to be similar to what we calculated on the dual lands. But I think that that's going to decrease as the price of the original drops. So note that on the reserve list, like I said, it's most of it is kind of garbage. And you can easily pull this up yourself. Tapped Out has a whole bunch of public decks that are just the reserve list, and you can group it by price. 260 cards on the reserve list are under $5 TCG market price. And then another 100 are under $20. So that's 360 cards out of the 500 something reserve list cards are under $20. Who's buying proxies for, a $12 card? I don't really believe that that's a market. Why would you do that? I have a hard time seeing it. Of the remaining 200 cards on the reserved list, half of them are under $100 and half of them are over $100. And obviously the more expensive the card, the more appealing a proxy alternative might be. But just to drill in a little bit further here, of those 100 cards that cost over $100, we've already hit the Power 9 and all the duels, and 6 more were covered by the gold bordered cards discussed before, the 6 that I pulled up as an example. So just add the Power 9 plus the dual lands plus those 6 that already have a gold treatment. Right there, that's already 25% of the cards over $100. So 25% of the most susceptible cards to this situation are already covered by this product that's coming out now, or else already have reprints of this type available. So when you're trying to figure out what's going to happen to the market down the road as Wizard carries on with this pattern, the potential impact is limited because we're not talking about a huge set of cards. 25% of them are already accounted for. Of the remaining 75%, some of them aren't that playable in formats. Some are collector staples. So it seems to me a very specific set of cards, less than 100 cards, are at any notable risk from future products like this. And when those future products do happen, and those 75 or so cards, less than that, because like Time Vault and stuff is going to be in that, is already impacted. So, call it 60 cards. What's going to happen to those maybe 60 cards that fall into this category of being more than $100 where a proxy makes sense and being, playable and so forth? Well, it seems to me you're just going to get a similar split as you got in the dual lands. You're going to see something like a 30% drop in demand. And really, that's regardless of the supply. Again, just look at the gold example. There are enough gold bordered cards to satisfy every single bid that has come to market in the last 3.5 months. But people don't go that way anyway. So, depending on the liquidity and the inventory of the specific card in question, I just don't see it substantially dropping the price. That 9.2% may track with all these cards. Now, if a card's a little bit less liquid, you might get wider steps in your asks on the order book. Whereas with the revised duels, there's enough liquidity that you'll get a lot of prices right at the same sort of market point. So, you know, perhaps a 30% drop in demand will have a larger impact on a card with less liquidity. But, you know, for these staple cards, there do tend to be a good amount of listings, a good amount of liquidity. And so, again, that 9.2 might track. And again, that's in addition to whatever the market is doing in the background. Very clean cards this batch. So what should you do? That's the question. Well, hopefully all these numbers clarify a little bit the magnitude of risk that we're talking about. I don't think it's as bad as some people were imagining. But, you know, it depends on your ability to absorb a 10% price drop on top of whatever the market might do. You know, I mean, certainly my equities portfolio was down by more than that. And yeah, you know, it would have been really swell if I'd exited right at the top and I was buying back in right at the bottom. You know, but that's dubious. You know, if you're going to try and exit and then re-enter, you have to do that with a great amount of caution, because there are always variables you didn't account for. Timing is never quite what one thinks it's going to be. So, you know, if this is the sort of fluctuation you can weather, it's usually wiser to just do that than to try and get fancy timing what might happen. So, you know, if your basis is below 10% down from recent market prices, and you weren't already planning to sell, you know, you're generally bullish on the market, then I would probably just suggest riding this out. I see no reason why the price is going to continue down after that initial market divide. You know, once you get that sort of 31% of buyers forking off to alternatives, that's the impact of this product. It's not going to have a cumulative impact. Or at least the gold bordered versions did not. And this occupies exactly the same role in the market. So, you know, as long as the game health remains, demand for these pieces will continue. Collector demand will remain and will carry on. You know, perhaps the market undergoes a correction. It will carry on. It will correct. This will become priced in. However, if you're already worried about the market, if you are not bullish on the market, if you are concerned about the price movements of sort of 2020 and 2021, then perhaps another 10% hit, you know, might be the flag you need to cut loose. You know, for your revised duels and your Silver Age stuff, when Wizards comes along and reprints proxies of each block, you're not going to be at as much risk as you might think. Also because the ability of Wizards to extract equity in lower value cards is lower. You know, keep in mind, this 30th anniversary set, in sort of one sweep, you know, just by hitting the Power 9 and the duels, they've tapped the vast majority of the equity that was sitting out there. The Silver Age does not have the same equity in it. It just doesn't. You know? So they'd have to price these Silver Age collector sets very differently, which would require higher print runs, you know, in order to net the same. But given the lower cost of the real cards, the demand might be lower. You know, again, who's getting proxies for cheaper cards? So that game might not be as profitable for them as we're all sort of thinking. You know, don't get me wrong, I would not be surprised in the slightest if we have something like this each year. But let's just be clear. They already tapped into the biggest equity pool that was sitting there waiting for them. So, you know, I've heard a lot of people talking about how the prices just keep getting more ridiculous and, you know, who knows what's next. You know, and They did the double masters, and now they're doing this for 1,000. You know, is the next one going to be 2,000? I disagree with that. I think we're probably seeing the highest price right now for the foreseeable future. And that's just because they've gone straight to the heart of it, you know? What card had more equity than Black Lotus? That's the one where they can max out the price. And again, in the first video I did on this, prior to this follow-up series, I calculated the EV of the box based on collector's edition prices. And my math had a few errors in it, but it was nonetheless correct in showing close to a neutral EV. In other words, they clearly priced this product to line up with the value of cards inside, assuming those cards were holding collector's edition value. So they can't price the Urza's Block 1 at $1,000 because that doesn't reflect the equity that's stored in those cards. So anyway, it seems to me that what we've got here is a risk tolerance problem, or a downside risk problem, I guess. If you don't like risk, we have definitely opened up a new can of worms, a new can of variables. And if it's more variables than you're comfortable tracking, fair enough. You know, maybe you should consider exiting. On the other hand, if you don't like risk, well, maybe being invested into pop culture, non-mature collectibles is not the best choice for you anyway. But yeah, if this is one step too far for your risk tolerance, time to reduce your exposure. Fair enough, you know? And I say all this, by the way, just in the interest of disclosure, without too much personal skin in the game. My significant positions are obviously Alpha, Unlimited, and vintage sealed stuff. I have very little Silver Age stuff, you know, almost none at quantity. For basically all of the Silver and Bronze Age staples, I'll have 1 or 2 copies, sometimes a play set. There's really only one card that I've got real exposure to here, and that's the foil version of Metalworker, which is a card I've recently fallen in love with. By the way, if you have one of those and you're looking to sell it, I'll buy it, and I'm not paying 60 cents on the dollar like some people. I'll pay fair private transaction price. But yeah, other than Alpha cards, foil Metalworker, that's a card I'm after. But yeah, anyway, so, you know, I only have one complete revised dual land set, for instance. It's the one my father gave me. I'm never selling it. I don't have piles of dual lands like many collectors I've seen. You know, so the fact I don't have a vested interest doesn't mean my math and my analysis is better than someone else's, but it does hopefully mean that what I've been saying and concluding is not coming from a place of bias or hope. I think it's what's in the numbers. And, you know, if you think I left something out or you disagree, certainly throw that into the comments. I'd love to hash this out some more. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me the biggest risk to my personal collection is the general market rejection of Wizards, which, you know, something like that could lead to a collapse of the game. I don't think that's going to happen, but it seems more likely to me that overall sentiment is would be a catalyzing factor than this particular product in and of itself, or even this sort of chain of products. You know, my first reaction at hearing all this was that the door they'd opened was ultimately the problem. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've looked at the actual equity available in the other sets, the way they would have to price it, and the way the current market reacts to these products already, I'm not nearly as concerned about that as I was. And again, I think I'm deriving that from the numbers, you know, so maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's something I didn't account for. You tell me. But yeah, okay, so that's what I got for this part 3. What should you do? What should you do with your stuff? Well, take my analysis as your sort of starting point, decide if you agree with it. If not, tweak the numbers accordingly. I am figuring the 30% drop in demand, which I'm figuring will equate to something like less than 10% drop. Again, all of these were worst case scenario numbers. A less than 10% drop in market price and in long-term ceiling. And you have to decide if that is a risk you're comfortable with. I do not think we're seeing anything that is market collapsing or game ending or even reserve list ending. Although I have a bit more to say on that. But yeah, in the final part, we'll get a little bit into that. If I think you should buy this, if I'm going to buy it, and a couple quick related topics. So if you followed me this far, I appreciate it. I realize this is quite a long form rant, but hopefully dividing into the parts helped. So we got one more to go. It'll be the shortest one, and then I can hopefully move on from the 30th anniversary stuff for a little while. All right, thanks again. Thanks for watching. If you like my content and you want to help the channel grow, then consider donating some vegetables and make sure we're getting lots of sleep. See you next time.